Good day, students. Hope you're all well. Dr. 𝐂𝐃𝐤𝐫 back here again. Now, as you know, we're continuing with our MBA series, International Strategic Management course. And today is week 2, or your second lecture, which is on the differences, national differences in political, economic and legal systems. As you know from your BBA studies, as when a firm operates, it's absolutely imperative to understand the whole regulatory framework and the environment that it operates. And especially when you've seen, multinational organizations, when they're operating in different countries, the legal, the political, and the economic systems it's got to be very much aware of. So that's basically the theme of today's lecture. So by the end of the lecture, what we'll be able to understand, your learning outcomes, as they say, understand how the political systems of different countries differ. So we're going to look at the political systems, we'll look at the economic systems, the legal systems, all very distinctive as well. And finally, what we'll do, we'll explain the implications for management practice in differences that you find, okay? And it's quite important. Now, when we look at the first one, political systems, as you know, so many different types of political systems there are. From you got the authoritarian governments, those with laissez-faire attitude towards businesses. Remember, our theme is towards businesses. Are they business friendly or not? Obviously, most Western countries are. They have an open door. But recently, when I say recently, past 30 years, India has opened its doors to a lot of multinationals coming in, but still there's control there as well. China and Russia still represents something of a closed door for multinationals, which obviously one would expect that as well. The system of government in a nation is called the political system, okay? And the two main parts, what you'll find, two main factors, is the degree in which they are, how democratic they are, to being totally authoritarian. So obviously you can get in between as well. And sometimes we call it, you might, from Hofstede's theory, collectivism or individualism. When you've studied Hofstede, you've seen on different national cultures, obviously whether a country is individual country or collective, which we all will discuss obviously in different modules. Now, coming back to the political system, when we say, what does collectivism mean? It means the needs of society as a whole, okay, rather than individual freedoms. So they look at the best for society. So Asian nations tend to be like that. So China will argue it's for the good of the nation that we do this. While individual types of countries like America, by Britain, it's all about how important it is for individual freedom. How much freedom do you get in operating your business? And obviously you've come across socialism, socialism, social capital and all that. That's public ownership of the means of production for the common good. Now obviously communist states are very much like that, and before the Russian wall went out, we had Poland, Bulgaria, all the Russian states had, Russian satellite states had very much socialist, communist types of governments as well, where public ownership was a means of production. Again, the theme was for the common good. And you come across in your studies Karl Marx. Karl Marx was a famous socialist thinker, and what he said, the few benefits at the expense of the many in a capitalist society where individuals are not restricted. So they argued against the capitalist system. So, and then you had the Social Democrats, who were also socialists, or sort of in between. They're sort of in the middle, like the Liberal Party you have in the UK, as opposed to going on the other extreme of the left, which is the communists. Then, if we look at individualism, and individual countries such as America, especially America, where you must have heard of the term dog eat dog, to get to the top, that means it's individuals themselves who have to, make sure that they, make sure they actually help themselves to develop their organisations and within their careers as well. So what this meant here is individuals should have a freedom in economic and political pursuit, obviously having no restrictions on political views. The interest of the individual should take precedent over the interest of the state, okay? Again, that's, debatable as well. People, there's obviously some people in America saying, oh, we're a police state, which obviously can be quite extreme. And you do have proper police states as well, which in the old days the communist countries were, and Russia still is. You could still call it a police state where police have powers to arrest. But people, the socialists in the UK argue that even the UK is somewhat of a police state as well. You get arguments like that. And when we look at the two extremes, what is democracy and totalitarianism? And, the Gulf War, all these were fought on the premise that, say, the leaders of like Iraq and Syria, they were totally totalitarian, and they had no regard for their people, and there was no democracy. Okay, again, it's all debatable. There's always arguments for that. Now, demographic governments are obviously you're exercised by your rights to vote. Okay, so obviously the UK, the US, Canada, France, Germany, very democratic countries. But nowadays, obviously now India, which is the largest democratic country, I think 1.2 billion people exercise their franchise in a big country like India. And then totalitarianism, one person or political exercise absolute control over all sphere of human life. So they control the legal sector, they control the political sector, they control the government sector as well. So it's so much, that's what it means, total control of it. Again, one could use examples as Egypt. Egypt has become a totalitarian state, okay? Jail sentences have been handed out to political prisoners. It's absolutely something that's there. So democracy and individualism go hand in hand, as do the communist version of it all, which is collectivism and totalitarianism. Okay, so that's about political systems I'll go through. I want you to go through the rest as well, because there's a few more details that you need to read when you're doing your assignments. I'll just jump over to economic systems. And what are the economic systems? What's a market economy? Okay, and that is where all productive activities are privately owned. The state owns very little. And in the UK, over the years, the state used to own the railways, the telecommunication, but back in the 1990s, when Margaret Thatcher was in power, they were all privatised, okay? So public, you could buy shares within the telecom company, within the railways, and obviously the argument there was competition was good, competition lowered prices as well. Countries like Bangladesh had Bangladesh Telecom. Again, they've done the same. Grameenphone and various other, foreign and local telecom companies have come in, and obviously the prices of phones have come down, not just of sets, but the lines, the calls as well. And very much on a very simple economic system where production is determined by supply and demand. Simple economics on the supply side. If there's demand for it, there should be a supply for it. Okay, and obviously from the supply side, there should be no restrictions. And what is the role of the government? Well, first of all, obviously not to interfere, but to encourage laissez-faire, environment, fair competition as well. Now, if there's a monopoly, so very few companies now are monopolies. How many monopolies can you name? Not many. Okay, but if you go back 50, 60 years, there were so many monopolies then. But over the last few decades, they've been deregulated, and they are also very much regulated by governments as well. So you can go to the Monopolies Commission in the UK. And when you look at certain economies, the command economy, where government plans for goods and service quality and price, allocates them for the good of society. So there'll be certain goods that they will encourage to be more available, because obviously it benefits society at large, the local population. All businesses are state-owned. Obviously, if you look at totalitarian states, this is what happens. And yes, communist countries, obviously Russia, China, they have a strict policy on that. And there's no real incentives for individuals to look for better ways to serve needs. But then, you know what? The argument is thrown out. China has one of the highest number of billionaires. Okay, so how did they become billionaires or millionaires? Okay, so it's something that's there. If we look at the Japanese economy, that's always been about, obviously, there is state involvement, but mainly companies such as Sony, Nissan, Toyota, the successful car companies, have thrived under like a free market economy, which obviously after the Second World War, the Japanese allowed this as well. Now, you might have come across something called mixed economy, and what's that? Where some sectors are privately owned and some government. To be honest, this is what you get in most of the Western world. There are still some sectors that are still owned by the government, but obviously over time they get sold out, they get privatized. And now they also help, if we go back, the British government helped the British coal, they helped the British steel 10, 15 years ago as well, when they were struggling. In America, Citicorp, when they were going through the financial crisis of 2008, and General Motors, the government came and bailed them out. So you're going to get that. That's quite common that you'll come across. So we finished the political and economic, and now the final part of this is the legal system. And obviously every country has different legal, different forms. If you look at India, India has its legal identity through the British rule. So there's a lot of British types influence on the courts, on the magistrates' courts, on the Crown Courts, and on the civil courts as well. And obviously these are rules and laws have to be regulated. And obviously laws are enforced, and laws are always enforced with case law. So commercial law is a huge market. So companies, when they're moving into any country, must be aware of them. They can't be naive and think, oh, I didn't know about the rules. And this corporate history is littered with so many examples of this. And as you know, Microsoft and Google had got real problem in Europe by the lack of the very low tax they were paying in relation to their huge profit. And obviously they offset tax in different ways, and governments had to the Irish government got involved a few years back with Google and Facebook. Because I think it was Google who actually set up their corporate headquarters in Ireland to avoid the double taxation as well. And then, as I mentioned, the different legal systems, there's a common law, civil law, and theocratic law as well. Now, theocratic law is, most common in Islamic law. So if you look at, giving a very good example, Iran is a very good example. Most of their laws are through the Islamic Sharia law as well. Saudi Arabia as well. So Saudi Arabia through the Sunni Muslim and the Shia Muslim through it's very strict as well. Okay, but obviously if you go to Central Europe, like Greece, there's certain aspects that protects churches from being converted into mosques and all that. In England, it's very, very, it's very free, and there's very little on the law, the religious law. I don't know whether you've noticed in America, they always say by God as well. So in America, it's quite religious as well, especially in the Bible Belt states as well, where they're very religious as well. So you've got to be very much aware of this as well, the different types. And when it comes to contract law, there's differences there, and you have to be aware. So companies, when they're making contracts, when they're buying subsidiaries or setting up subsidiaries or buying other companies, obviously there's so much contracts are there. Then you've got to look at the actual law under what it is. Dubai, as you know, for the last 30 odd years, Dubai has been open to business. And now, it's only recently, last 10 years, Dubai has allowed individuals and companies to invest in the country. Prior to they didn't. You needed an Arab sponsor who had half of your business, either 51-49. But now that's all changed. You can actually set up your own business. But again, you've got to be very much aware of the laws and things like that. And obviously people say, well, I don't pay tax in Dubai. Yes, you don't, but there's other fees that act as taxes as well. So yeah, well, companies have to be aware of this. And then there's a lot of, when it comes to legal systems, obviously the United Nations are there, the bodies are there for arbitration, when you have problems. Because if you fall into a problem, if a company falls into a problem, or you as an individual investing in certain country, you've got to be aware of the laws. Otherwise, it could burn. So many companies have burnt their hands and they've withdrawn from the market because the laws they weren't aware of. One of the big things is corruption. Okay, so obviously, as you know, there's a lot of countries that have corruption at a very high level. You have to be aware of that as well. And Western companies have, don't get this wrong, that's all Asian companies. Western companies are bribed. And good examples of this, as I mentioned in another lecture, is in Nigeria, the oil companies. They've given millions and millions of pounds to the government to allow them to drill in the delta. And obviously in return, they weren't interfered with. Again, it's quite common. It's been very common. And if you look at this graph, look at the size of corruption as well. I think on this graph, New Zealand, if I can see it, New Zealand is right at the bottom, okay? But look right at the top as well, Somalia, okay? Venezuela, Zimbabwe, Nigeria, then you got Russia, you got China there as well, United Kingdom, Germany, all those in the lower half. So obviously there's so many, and who does this? Who actually does this index? Transparency International. They actually monitor this quite. So anyway, the rest of the lectures, please have a look and see about obviously what influences a certain country to be market attractive. So that's why you see a lot of companies coming into Western Europe because of the laissez-faire attitude they have towards it. They encourage more businesses. And that's not to say India doesn't, and countries like Pakistan, Bangladesh and Sri Lanka, they've opened their doors as well. They see that foreign investment is a great thing as well. Not only do they help the local company, but they also will enable the multinational to invest in capital, in more human resources, and making it even better. So there's a lot of advantages for that, and it's something that you will obviously no doubt find in further studies. Okay guys, that's it, finished it for today. Thank you so much. Do go through the portal, go through the lecture notes again, and read the chapter of this lecture. Thank you, take care, see you again soon, bye.